Greetings to those who watch below. Before we start today, I'd like to say thank you to Ghost City Shelton, Lefty Kim, Lisa Watts and Steffi Ray for being those who dwell below. If you'd like to join them and also get shoutouts at the start of every video, make sure to click the link in the description box. Now, Halloween may be over, and the world is gearing up for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stop with the horror. So for today, here are some truly terrifying encounters with inhuman entities. The Tree Goblin by Owl Headdress. This story happened when I was around 6 years old and was my first encounter with the paranormal in 1994. My father would take me to visit my uncle in Fort Kipp on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, at their father's house, a nothing town, which he lived outside of as a child. The place just gives off feelings of hopelessness and sorrow. Even just driving past it, I felt this when I was a child. The area of his homestead had no houses around it for miles, just trees and hills. They would drink coffee and talk for hours. On this occasion, I was playing in front of my uncle's deck and ramp. I remember just digging in the dirt, being a kid, and finding a silver dollar in the ground, when I had this sudden feeling I was being watched. I ignored it for a few moments, then I looked south. Not too far off, I'd say about 40 to 50 yards away, was a tree. The closest tree to the house, in fact. I could see the left side of the tree was completely vertical, right as rain. But the right side wasn't. I could see a figure peeking from around the tree. The thing is, it was the same colour as the bark of the dead tree. It looked one with it, never moving once. Its fingers were wrapped around the trunk. It had a long and pointed head, egg-shaped eyes, huge and hollow, and its mouth had a smile unlike anything I've yet to see. It was staring at me. Imagine the scariest part of the scariest movie you've ever seen. I couldn't move. It was complete paralysis. I must have been like that for a whole minute. Whatever it was, it knew I was aware of it. My first thought was, I wonder how fast it was. Then something snapped. I ran as fast as my leg would take me up the stairs inside. My father and his brother were at the kitchen table. I told my dad, panicked, and told him to hurry quick, come outside, there's something watching me. I grabbed his hand and led him to the spot I was at, and said, look. But when I pointed at the tree, I could see that it was a normal tree now. Both sides were vertical. I couldn't speak. I felt very silly for a moment, but I knew what I saw was real. All my dad said was, don't worry about it, don't think about it, it's okay, and led me inside. My father and I are Native American, and I guess we're blessed with gifts that we didn't want. As I grew older, he told me more and more about what he was able to see. He told me such outlandish things in such an honest way that I knew he couldn't be lying. Things he saw on the same land I saw the Goblin, the land he grew up on. The Elemental of Forest by deathcipris. It was only about a year ago in late September, early October, that an acquaintance and soon-to-be good friend of mine began talking about the band shirt I was wearing that day. We conversed through class and carried on our conversation outside. Right as we were about to depart, my friend brought up what would seem to be a strange topic, and to anyone that was not familiar with the paranormal, it would indeed seem strange. He mentioned the woods behind his house, and the strange happenings at and around them. He mentioned noises sounding like an elephant's trumpet, screeches like those of a freight train, odd feelings like one is being watched, orbs, shadows, and much more. It sounded too good to be true, so I, not knowing my new friend that much yet, asked if he drank excessively or did drugs. He told me he didn't drink and has never done drugs in his life. Upon further investigation of the site, and getting to know him a little better, both his assertions of his haunted woods and his drink and drug-free lifestyle were indeed true. But with the haunted woods, I got a little bit more than I would bargain for. We set a day that we could stop by and investigate the woods further together, and on that day, I was still apprehensive of all that he had told me was going on. When I arrived, the house was a small 2-story, and kind of seemed old, like maybe back in the 1950s, with shutters, and painted a faded blue against the aging vinyl siding. The front yard had all sorts of Halloween decor, with the obligatory jack-o'-lantern, black cats, and stereotypical witches. It seemed sort of quaint in an eerie way. One could barely see the woods behind the house, except for one gigantic oak tree, the likes of which would dwarf any house short of a mansion. I entered the house, and we goofed off until darkness set in. I went downstairs for a drink and a smoke, and was informed the fridge with the drinks was in the garage, which was convenient enough for me because the side door was strategically placed next to the fridge. I grabbed my drink and stepped outside into a small chain-linked area surrounding the side door. The chain-link area was small, maybe 5 by 5, and was contained in his already fenced yard. I believe it was something the previous owners had installed to deter thieves. Regardless, I was standing in the middle and proceeded to light up. I took a few drags from the cigarette, and out of nowhere, I heard a tap, tap on the vinyl siding coming from around the corner toward the back of the house. I dismissed this as nothing but the wind, or even his dogs, even though the tapping seemed to come from about my height, 6'2". I continued smoking, but then heard another tap-tap, this time a little closer to the edge of the house. Again, I dismissed this as the wind or an animal. I then heard another tap-tap, this time a little bit closer. I stopped smoking now, and my eyes fixed on the corner. I then heard a slap coming from right around the corner. I immediately ran in to see where everyone was, to possibly catch my friend trying to play up his stories he had told earlier, only to find him sitting down upstairs on his computer. I told him the story, and he explained to me of the elemental spirit that wanders into his yard and plays tricks like that. Now, with this fresh in my mind, I had to know what else was out there. We went outside and around his house to the backwoods. As we got closer and closer to the forest edge, there was just a feeling of something staring back at you from the woods, and there was a strange force, akin to a "this is a bad idea" feeling, that surrounded the perimeter of the forest. I dared not go any further into the woods, and expressed my concern to my friend, where he proceeded to say we would definitely not go into the woods, and that it was dangerous at night. We both simply walked the perimeter, and suddenly something caught my mind's eye. I felt an odd sort of energy emanating from one of the trees. I told him something is different about that tree, and he told me that was where he saw the little dead girl he told me about in his stories. Another odd happening, but easily rationalised away, just like earlier with the tapping. I looked away from the tree and focused down our path, where I noticed a pile of wood sitting at the end of the road past a fence. I got a very odd feeling from that area when I stared at it, like someone was standing there looking back as I stared into an inanimate pile of wood. This time, I kept the feeling to myself. We ventured around further and came across a field with a low fog, and he explained to me how he believes the fog is how the forest breathes. Coming from my druidic background, I agreed wholeheartedly. He warned, though, that when the forest breathes, it can also be a warning to stay away, and he had noticed activity increases when there is fog present. After a chat about the fog, he told me the tale of the elemental that rose from the ground and chased him and his friend back across the field. He told of the immense speed this shadow possessed. It literally cleared a football field in a matter of seconds, by zigzagging back and forth and running on its knuckles. This could be an exaggeration in the story, but the detail it was told in gives me a different impression. Either way, I was about to find out what he meant. We came to the other side of the field, not by cutting across like he did in the story, but coming in from the other side. There was an ominous street light adjacent to a dirt road that led back and followed the edge of the field. As soon as we approached the dirt road, the street light went out. He told me that this light has a short and is known to do this frequently. I agreed with the rationalization and we continued down the path. The farther we pushed in, the more I felt the air getting dense and heavy. Then all of a sudden, I froze. I believe I hit the second barrier. The first I passed by when we entered the road. The first was the "this isn't a good idea" feeling barrier I spoke of before. The second barrier felt like an actual wall. I couldn't move. I called my friend over and told him that I wouldn't move another inch. He agreed to head back out with me. We reached the entrance again, and as soon as we neared the light, it went out. Again. The light came back on after a few seconds. I was facing the light with my back to the entrance, while my friend stood in front of me, while he talked about miscellaneous stuff, and I smoked. When from behind me, I heard a very loud pop. The only way I can describe it is either like a small item falling from a very large distance, like the top of a tree, and slamming into a bunch of twigs, or a large branch snapping. I figured it was the first, and asked, "What kind of trees are these?" thinking they were pine. He replied, "Magnolia." I slowly stuttered, "Magnolias don't flower in October, do they?" And just then, my friend's eyes darted up. He looked at me with the most serious expression I have ever seen. He said, "We have to leave. Now." I was now puzzled and frightened. What happened behind my back to scare him so badly? I wanted to know, but he refused to tell me. We slowly backed away from the entrance very calmly and took a different route back to his house. On the way back, he told me what he saw. He said the branch snapping was the elemental kicking off to jump, and what he saw, and I wish I could have seen too, was the elemental jumping across the street from tree to tree to get a better view of us. Monster with Hammer by Sabuchanan. I don't really believe in supernatural stuff, but I had an experience when I was very young, and I've never been able to explain it. I was about 4 years old. My sister and I shared a bedroom. Every night I would wake up and hear what sounded like hammering coming from the other room. I didn't bother to tell anyone, because no one else could hear it, and I knew no one would believe me. I would be very frightened and go and ask to sleep with my mum and dad, whose bedroom was just a couple of doors down the hall. Even when we went on vacation and were staying in a beach house, I could hear the hammering, so it was like it was following me. It wasn't attached to the house, it was attached to me. It was terrifying, and as a frightened little girl, there was no way I would go out and investigate it. One night, when I heard it, I went into the hallway to make my way to my mum and dad's room, and as I put my hand on their doorknob, I looked back down the hall, in the general direction of the hammering noise. There was a huge, horned, faceless black and white monster standing there with a hammer. I screamed and collapsed. My mum came out and scooped me up, and then I was okay. The weirdest thing is, after that night, I never again heard the hammering. Another weird thing is that I found out later that my sister had also been hearing the noises, and had also not said anything. She told me about this later in life, and I asked if she had heard me scream. She said yes, but at the time she figured the big bad wolf had gotten me. It must have been scary for her too. Nothing that dramatic has happened to me since, but I have heard footsteps in the hall when no one's there. When we got older, my sister and I had separate rooms at opposite ends of a shared hallway. It was just us upstairs, and I would periodically hear footsteps in the hallway, and when I asked my sister if she had heard them, she would irately deny it. The thing is, I know she heard them too, because one night when I was lying awake listening to them, my sister called my name, because she thought it was me, wandering around the hallway. A Thing on a Bridge by Tom Coates. I live in the rural town of Port Hedland, Western Australia, and this is what happened on a walk I had. It was a couple of weeks ago, on the 12th of August. I was walking alone at about 5:30 in the afternoon. I would normally have been walking my dog Charlie at this time, but she'd had an eye infection that kept her from sleeping and didn't seem up to the exercise. Port Hedland is a coastal town near the northern end of Australia, and is prone to heavy rain from cyclones. The annual torrents require an extensive system of ditches running through the town to drain water off the roads. There also tends to be a lot of empty land between blocks of houses, massively overgrown with weeds, that are only occasionally burned or trimmed away by the council. I was walking along a narrow concrete bridge when I heard heavy breathing from the ditch below me. At first I thought it was a drunk. Then I remembered the time I was jogging through a park and realised that I was running straight towards a large, feral-looking mongrel dog who was poking out of the yellow scrub and baring more and more teeth as I approached. We forget how close we are to nature. I hurried along the bridge and looked under it after retreating to a respectful distance. There was nothing there. More relaxed and curious now, I walked back onto the bridge to ponder the origin of the sound. It promptly resumed. This time, I boldly leaned over the railing and looked right under the bridge. Again, I saw nothing more suspicious than empty faded beer cans. I straightened up, and stinking hot breath blew into my ear. It was fear that I felt. Pure fear. Using some fancier word could only cheapen the experience. I fell back, facing the source of the breath. There was nothing I could see, but the heavy panting continued, and I was well familiar with that rotten flesh smell unique to the breath of a dog on a bloody diet. Before I even realised I should be getting up, there was a sudden, invisible pressure on my chest. I expected paws, but I didn't quite feel them. Even now, I can't quite discern the shape of the force that held me, whether I was restrained by paws, claws, hands, or a flat slate. Vicious howling erupted in front of me. Thoughts of the dog filled my mind, until I couldn't even see where I really was. That killer mongrel peeking his nose out of the bush, coolly deciding how close he would allow me to come before he lunged. Unable to think straight, I imagined that this was what was supposed to have happened, that I had fluked my way out of some cosmic debt, and now the collector was knocking. Then, it was gone. I didn't move for some time. I wanted to go back there. It took me 4 days to get the nerve to actually do it, but I knew I wanted to go back. I thought about it for a while, and decided everything needed to be the same. I arrived at the bridge at 5:30 the next Wednesday, walked to the centre, and waited. After minutes of nothing, I realised what had drawn the thing to me. I began to picture the dog once more, remembered the lip pulling back, and the stained points behind. As nothing continued to happen, I realised what was different from the first time. The memory no longer scared me. I've thought about this, and realised a few things. The first time I crossed the bridge, something, not a ghost in usual terms, I have no reason to believe it was ever human, created the breathing sound that I was free to ignore or interpret however I wished. It was only after I returned to the bridge that the breath resembled a dog's. I think the thing offered me a chance to show it what I feared, and I did. I could think of 2 reasons why it acted as it did. Perhaps it wanted me to exercise my demons, so to speak, or in some way, it wanted my fear for its own reasons. We forget how close we are to nature, but maybe some part of nature needs us a little closer. Hi guys, thank you for listening to today's stories. I really hope you enjoyed them. If you did, make sure to like, share, comment and subscribe to the channel. Also hit the notification bell, that way you will know whenever the next video comes live. Also, big news, I'd like to announce to you all that I am now the site manager for creepypasta.com, and it's up to me to choose which stories are posted on the site. So feel free to go over and check out creepypasta.com, check out the new stories I started a couple of days ago at the beginning of November, and if you like them, make sure to comment on them and also give them a rating. It lets the authors know how well of a job that they've done. So, until next time, sleep tight.